52 years after a county court reporter was killed, Sacramento County's oldest cold case has finally been solved according to authorities. It's been said that justice can sleep for years and awaken when it's least expected, and a miracle is nothing more than dormant justice from another time, showing up to compensate those it has cruelly abandoned, according to Sacramento County District Attorney Anne-Marie Schubert. This case takes us to Sacramento, California, a state known as America's farm-to-fork capital because of its abundance of locally grown food. However, Nancy's family would not have thought Sacramento was a safe place after what happened on the evening of October 25, 1970. Sacramento is located at the confluence of the Sacramento and American rivers. Nancy Marie Benelick was born on June 13, 1942, in Nevada City, San Bernardino County, California. Her parents, Brian Addison Benelick and Elaine Laverne Kessler, raised her in Grass, Nevada. She also had a sister named Linda. Nancy Marie Benelick attended Hennessy School before attending Nevada Union High School. After graduating from high school, Nancy went to beauty school and worked as a hairstylist in Hawaii for a while before enrolling in a court reporting program. Upon earning her degree, she began working as a court reporter in the Sacramento District Court. Arden Way, on Bell Street in Sacramento, was where Nancy resided in an apartment building. Nancy had a lovely life and a fiancé, but she lived alone with her cat. Italian Salami Salome was the top public defender in the Sacramento District Court at the age of 28. Salome and Nancy met while working at the same location and time, which is how they got together. At the time, Nancy and Salome were engaged and planning to marry on November 28, 1970. Sadly, this was a date she would never remember. On October 25, 1970, Nancy and Salome went out to dinner after work. The couple couldn't get enough of each other, so after dinner, they went back to Nancy's apartment and spent more time together. Nancy, who was probably exhausted, fell asleep at the time. Salome decided to leave since Nancy was sleeping. He checked the time and he saw that it was 11:30 p.m. When Nancy was away from work on October 26, 1970, her co-workers noticed it and thought it was highly strange because she typically gave them advance warning. One co-worker became concerned and called her son Jack to check on Nancy at her apartment. When Jack arrived at Nancy's flat, he banged on the door repeatedly but received no response. At that point, he realized something was up. After some discussion, the building manager agreed to open Nancy's door, and when they did, they discovered the most horrific scene they'd ever seen. Nancy lying lifeless in a pool of her own blood, with multiple stab wounds throughout her body from a brutal attack, and her head was almost severed. The scene was so horrifying that neither the building manager nor Jack could ever forget it. Who killed Nancy? Nancy's sister Linda, who was already concerned that her sister was missing, was waiting to hear from someone about her sister's whereabouts. When she received a call from her husband Tom, asking her to return home right away, Linda knew something was wrong, even though she had hoped everything would be okay. Tom broke the news of Nancy's death to Linda, and also went to tell the news to Nancy's mother, who was working on Lighton Hill. The police were able to find some things upon getting to the crime scene. If you're wondering why the lead detective, Mickey Lynx, didn't believe the attacker wore gloves instead, it's because gloves were not as readily available as they are today. Investigators also found a blood trail showing that the killer had been wounded. The blood trail led from the killer's location on the second-story balcony to the sidewalk below. The investigators conducted a more thorough examination of Nancy's body and came to the conclusion that she had suffered over 30 stab wounds. It was assumed that Nancy was killed between 11:30 when Salome left the flat and the early hours of October 26, 1970. Although everyone was in shock, one of Nancy's neighbors, Alice Silva, claimed to have heard a scream, footsteps, and someone running from Nancy's apartment at around 1:30 a.m. This was thought to be the time of the murder, though the motive could be anything. The investigators spoke to more than 500 people in an effort to find a suspect in the case. But all efforts proved to be fruitless, as no one could point out any suspects who could be the killer, as Nancy had no known enemies. Investigators believe that Nancy and her killer struggled before she died, as shown by the wounds on her arms. Because there was no fingerprints, the blood trail was the only way to identify the killer, but it was believed that the perpetrator was a young, agile person who climbed up the second-story balcony and entered Nancy's room through the open glass door. In order to continue with the case for decades, the case became cold. Since 52 years ago, all the detectives could do with the blood and the technology at the time was to ascertain the killer's blood group. Nancy's friends and family tried to bring about justice for her, but there was nothing they could do due to the lack of technological advancement 7 months before Nancy passed away. When registered nurse Judith Ann Hikari was murdered nearby, about 850 feet away, the police started to connect the two cases because of some similarities. Judith, a 23-year-old woman, was attacked on the weekend like Nancy, and both worked in professional fields for many years. Detectives believe that there was a connection between the two cases because of the similarities found in them. It was hypothesized that both women were victims. Judith was abducted days before she was killed on March 7, 1970, while returning from work. She was also engaged to be married to her fiancé, who was waiting for her the day she was killed. In November 2019, 49 years after Nancy's passing, detectives from the Sacramento County Sheriff's Cold Case Team and investigators from the District Attorney's Office launched a forensic genetic geology investigation using new technology. Since then, the authorities have used this technology to solve cold cases. Investigative genetic genealogy uses DNA profiles from a crime scene or from unidentified human remains to identify close generic DNA profiles or matches by comparing the known genealogy of those close familial matches. The DNA profile created in 2004 was uploaded on the open-source genealogy website in order to trace the suspect. The number of potential near relatives of either the culprit or the victim is reduced. The detectives had to wait 3 years for the results, and with the aid of the suspect's family, who supplied her DNA, the detectives were able to identify the killer after more than 50 years. Richard was identified as Nancy's murderer 52 years later, on July 21, 2022. Born on March 22, 1943, John Davis, 27, committed the crime. He shared an apartment with Nancy until 1974 or 1975. Davis lived in 23 and Nancy in 17. Mickey Lynx, a retired sheriff's office detective who participated at a press conference after the case was solved, said Davis could see Nancy's apartment from his because they were on the opposite ends of a pool. Davis plotted Nancy's murder because he entered her apartment through the slightly ajar glass door on the night of the murder and taped his fingers. The 500 people interviewed for a month following Nancy's death didn't observe Davis and Nancy argue or even talk. Davis and his roommate were present, but they give significant evidence, so detectives believe Davis had feelings for Nancy and killed her when he realized she was getting married soon. Davis, charged with driving under the influence, got free in Sacramento because there was no proof. Nancy's family and friends mourned her every year and prayed for her killer's capture while Davis went about his job. Nancy's killer was found 52 years later after they gave up hope. Before this day, leukemia killed Salome. February 2nd, 2014. Salome would have been disheartened if David evaded justice even if he were alive. According to Mickey Lynx, Davis died at 54 from alcohol-related illnesses on November 2nd, 1997. David would have faced first-degree murder charges if alive. Sadly, there won't be any legal justice, but Linda and Tom, I hope this provides you and Nancy and your family some peace, Lynx said at the news conference. Cox, in a signed statement read by Sheriff spokesman Lieutenant Rodney Grassman, Nancy's sister and her husband Tom Cox were seated next to Mickey Lynx during the address, but did not speak because Linda was crying. Linda said her family was grateful to Lynx for never giving up on the case. How many times have my husband Tom and I stated Nancy would adore our ranch, all our animals and big open spaces, she wrote. We miss sharing our children and grandkids, and so much more regrettably. Nancy's family did not see Davis imprisoned, but we hope that uncovering the culprit will have provided them peace. That's how Sacramento's oldest cold case was solved. How do you feel about this situation? Do you believe Davis would have even been apprehended if he hadn't left a blood trail? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification before leaving. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.